Everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the Learn with Medical Library podcast. I'm Rebecca David, Senior Medical Librarian from the Chian School of Medicine. Today we're going to talk a little bit more on the transformative experiences and achievements from the Medical Education Unit at LKCMedicine. Joining me in today's episode is none other than our Vice Dean of Education, President, as well as also the Director of the Medical Education and Research Unit, MERSU, at LKCMedicine. Let's welcome Professor Jennifer Anne Cleland.
Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning, Professor Cleland. Let's start off our conversation a little bit about the cornerstone of LKCMedicine's curriculum, which is our Year 4 Scholarly Research Projects. Indeed, this is actually a wonderful opportunity for our students to experience research. And it's unique here in the sense that the students go through an intensive 6 weeks experience. Do share with us a little bit about the history and the significance of this journey for our students and how our students would benefit from it.
Okay, well, my understanding is that the scholarly project was envisaged right from the start of the LKCMedicine MBBS, because medical degrees across the world would often include research experiences, because there is an awareness that when one graduates and becomes a doctor, you may not always be involved in producing research, but you will always be involved in using research. And so you really need to experience what doing research is about to do either of or both of those roles effectively. So the LKCMedicine 6-week scholarly projects is in 4th year, but we build up to that. So it's maybe worth saying that that's part of a theme. We don't just throw people into doing a 6-week research project, because that would be quite challenging. We start in year 1 and year 2 teaching our students how to critically appraise the literature, how to get a research paper and read it and think, okay, this is a good research question, they have gone about answering this question in the right way, and the results are in some way useful or impactful. So we start with those kind of the basic building blocks of research, and then when it comes to the 6-week scholarly project, that is a chance for our students to actually do research, to try what it's like, to have some practice. And 6 weeks isn't hugely long, but it is long enough. It is long enough to do something meaningful. All our members of faculty and some of our clinical adjuncts and actually colleagues from NTU will submit projects about a year in advance. This is all hugely planned. Students just don't kind of float into a research project. They choose months and months in advance. And so that has lots of advantages. It had advantages for faculty because they can think ahead and think, what will I have ready for a student in about a year's time? Where could they slot into my team? What could they do that would be useful for them and useful for us? For the student, they get to choose from a really wide range of projects, some clinical, some more lab-based, and so on. And they know what they're doing. So they can actually start doing some informal preparation. Once the students know what scholarly project they have, they'll go and talk to the person they'll be working with. They'll go and do some literature reviewing. They'll talk to other members of the team. They'll kind of start mentally preparing themselves for it so they're not going in cold. And then during the 6 weeks, it's pretty focused on doing a piece of research, whether that be a literature review, whether it be lab research, whether it be clinical research. And they have to write up a report. In an ideal world, we hope that our students will get a conference poster or even a paper out of their 6-week scholarly project. And I'd like to maybe mention one thing that we've brought in this year that's new. Previously, the students had no say in what research project they did. They had to just vote for or rank which they would prefer doing, and then they were assigned the projects. This year, for the first time, we've brought in a process of co-creation. So students can go to a member of staff, they can say, I'd really like to do my scholarly project in your area. Are there any possibilities? And they will develop a project together with the member of staff. So this year coming, we have 10 4th years who will be doing a co-created scholarly project. So we're excited about that.
Wow, that's really an incredibly valuable experience for our students, and seeing how the history has evolved to create more challenges as well as opportunities for our students to learn from our faculties as well. And I think that one of the strongest pillars of support here at LKC is the faculty support, the supervision, which really looks at the bigger realms of faculty mentorship. It's truly a mentoring process. Do share with us a little bit on the significance and importance of faculty mentorships, and how is this actually an important and crucial experience for our students?
I think it's part of being an academic. You mentor others, you capacity build, you bring on your field. So, I mean, speaking as a researcher as well as the Vice Dean of Education, I mean, I've had 20 successful PhD students in my time, and that whole role of being a PhD student supervisor is mentorship and guidance and nudging. And it's not so different with an undergraduate or with a medical student. Okay, the end product is different. They're not working towards a thesis, but they are working towards completion of a successful project. So as the mentor, you have to, I think the first thing is enthuse them for the research, because if they're not enthusiastic, if you cannot enthuse your juniors and your students to be interested in your area of research, then you're not going to, you're not going to get very far. And then once they're enthused, it's then showing them and helping guide them as to how identifying appropriate questions that address a gap in knowledge, and then guiding them in how best to answer those questions, what methodologies to use, what analysis to use, the kind of how to do it. So the enthusiasm, then the question, and then the support in the how to do something and how to write up a project. That's often where people struggle.
Additionally, I think also to help the faculty, as you know, there's tremendous support offered for them, and truly we thank you, for inspiring our faculty members as well as our students through this, incredible journey that they undertake at the MBBS level as well as PG, postgraduate level. The medical library also often sees all these students who come in for student consultations, where we do see the rigor of research increases a long time as well, especially when they engage in systematic reviews. So, Prof. Cleland, speaking of libraries, are you a fan of libraries yourself?
Yes. I obviously, knowing that we were talking today, I started kind of reflecting on my use of libraries over the more years than I'd like to remember. And as a child, I would always go to libraries, like the public library in the town I lived in and the school libraries. And then obviously, I was a student between PhDs and masters and so on and so forth. I was a student for 10 years, and I spent a lot of time in the library then, particularly, this shows how old I am, but there was no internet when I did my PhD. Right. So to get the studies I wanted, to get the literature I needed for my PhD, I had to physically walk to a library, go into a library, go around big shelves of huge tomes of journals to find the right volume to get the right paper to photocopy it. If the library didn't stock a journal, you had to send away for an interlibrary loan, and that would take, if you were lucky, 3 weeks. And that was just how it was, and everything was timed differently in those days.
Yes.
I remember having a PhD student a few years ago, and he came to see me and he said, I can't get this paper through the internet, through Scopus or Medline or whatever search engines he was looking through. And he went, so I'm just not going to use it. And I went, no. You've just told me it's a crucial paper, so why don't we get an interlibrary loan? And he's like, what's that? Yeah. And how long will it take? And I said, about 3 weeks. And he looked absolutely horrified, and I was like, oh, times have really changed. Times have really changed. And now as an adult, in my personal life, one of the things I love about Singapore is the National Library Board and Libby. Yes. So I have on my reader, I use Libby all the time. It's great. Yeah. It is the biggest bargain in Singapore for an expat.
Yes, it encourages reading. And and thank you so much for supporting our libraries. And I'm sure our listeners will be very keen to know what are your favorite books, or perhaps even your childhood cherished reads. Do share with us, Prof. Cleland.
A child of the 70s, a lot of my reading was Eden Blyton, The Magic Faraway Tree, The Shalley School, The Secrets of, and all that kind of thing, which were great at the time. I read them now. My daughter actually has some of them, and I can see that they're a little dated, but that was what was available. I remember tripping over a copy of a Narnia book in the house, and it was The Magician's Nephew, and I didn't realise when I picked it up and read it that it was part of a series. There's actually 6 Narnia books, and I was blown away with that, the whole kind of otherworldliness of it. And I can still envisage the volume and the pictures, the pen drawings that were in it. And that did instill in me a liking of books that can kind of take you out of yourself. And one of the others that I really loved was the Phantom Toll Booth. So this is my daughter's copy. I actually bought her a copy because I felt it should be essential reading for every tween. But I just realised it's the 50th anniversary of the book. Crumbs. This is just a book that's full of imagination, that takes you off in fantasies. It's very clever. It's very, very well done. So I tried to read this kind of thing more as a young, sort of teenager, young, 10, 11, 12. And then I read everything that was in the house. I read all my parents' books. I read my grandparents' books, some of which are, of course, very dated now, but I enjoyed them. And maybe that's what gave me a liking for the classics, because I read everything I could lay my hands on. So I then made a policy to try to read classic novels at regular intervals, particularly things like Dickens, which I enjoy. I mean, Dickens is very easy to read once you get into it. And I did English as a minor at university, so that forced me to read widely, not just novels, but also plays and poetry and so on. And in terms of some of the classic literature that I read, it wasn't just the older classics, it was also the more contemporary classics. So this is a good one. The Catcher in the Rye, again, my daughter's copy. Maybe I'm, what do you call it in Singapore? Maybe I'm a bit of a tagger mummy, making her read some of these books. But this is a great book as well. And this book I remember buying and reading from start to finish without stopping many, many years ago. And now, life is busy, so I'm not as good at reading worthy literature as I used to be, but I do have a predilection for a good detective novel, but I tried to counterbalance that with sort of other genres and other books.
That's incredible. This is really prescription for the mind to truly take our readers into exploring books that will allow them to travel through imagination as well. I was actually anticipating something more in context with medicine, but this is better than it gets. Yeah. So that's wonderful. Maybe, Prof. Jennifer, we should start a book club then for under your name. I think that will actually encourage our younger generation of doctors to spend some time reading. From student research to the MERSU grant that looks at how research can also take its success through publications as well, and how this can leave a very lasting impact at a medical school. Share with us more about the MERSU grant and how it supports medical education and interdisciplinary research.
Okay. Well, it's probably worth saying a little bit about educational research first to understand the context. So medical education research, often called MER or health professions education research, are very big fields of endeavour. I think we're situated in a very biomedical medical school, and I think there's actually perhaps less of an awareness of the breadth of research that goes on related to education in a medical school as compared to other places. So we have there's lots of journals that focus purely on medical education, and lots of people active in this area across the world. But of course, it's about why is it important? Why are we actually researching medical education? People might think that's slightly strange, but we are producing the doctors of the future. We're producing people that are looking after patients. We need to know that we are assessing them robustly. We need to know that we are only passing those who are safe to pass. We need to know we're teaching everything that they need to know in ways that they will learn. We need to look at things like how much does our education cost to deliver? Can we do cost-effective education? Can we do better education using this tool compared to that tool? And there's also broader questions such as how do we select people into medical school, and how do we support people who are struggling? Also, how do doctors and medical students make their decision about what specialty they want to go into? How do we workforce plan? And workforce planning is a concern across the world, particularly with global migration. Any things that we can look at just so that we can do things to the best of our ability for this point in time and build on existing knowledge. So the way that we assessed medical students, for example, in the 60s, it's very, very different from how we assess them now, as you would hope. But medical schools are very slow to change, so it takes time to build the evidence and then get the evidence into practice. So the MERSU grant it's not a large grant, but it's large enough to allow people to do something meaningful. Staff put in applications we're doing to find out more about it, or doing something different than evaluating how effective it is. So there are lots and lots of different ideas. I know what the applications are this year, but in previous years they have been very, very diverse, and that's great because that reflects the area. I think conferences are incredibly important as an academic or as someone who's interested in research. And it's, one of the things we do here at LKC is we provide funding for all our students to go to one local and one international conference during their tenure as a medical student. And I can still remember the first conference I went to as a PhD student. They're hugely inspiring. I mean, apart from the kind of anxiety about presenting your own work, which inevitably you have to present your own work to get the funding to go to a conference. Yes. That's the same across the world.
I recall, right, Professor Cleland, I presented a poster at the first MERSU conference in 2018, and that was held at LKCMedicine. Tremendous support, as well as also a lot of contributions, you know, through speeches and very inspiring talks as well. I think some projects have actually evolved over time. So I remember when I presented my project, it was very theory-driven at first.
Good.
The MERSU conference paved a way for my project to expand through growth and stronger collaborations with faculty. Conferences like this, especially like MERSU, it becomes a part of our project success stories.
I actually think what you get out of conferences is seeing what everybody else is doing, seeing what's going on in that particular world, listening to inspiring talks, thinking, oh crumbs, I didn't know that, oh that's interesting, how can I take that home, how can that influence what we do at LKC or wherever it is one works. I mean, there's lots and lots of projects that I would say are evolving, things that are moving forward. But probably the best established field of research we have is in our anatomy education, where they have been working for, 10 years or so now to bring in innovations in anatomy education. And I would say that research has had MERSU funding and other funding, and there's a very clear program of research. It's clear programmatic research that they have built on all their previous projects to provide a really big body of work and a very clear focus. And MERSU grants contributed to that success.
That's wonderful.
I was a visiting professor in Japan in 2009, and my colleagues in Japan published this book as the 10th anniversary celebration of their unit in Gifu University, and they asked me to contribute a chapter. So my chapter is published in English, but they also translated it into Japanese. So I'm very proud of that, because it was a really nice time in my life. It was great fun being a visiting professor, lovely colleagues, really great place to work. And there's not many British academics have a chapter in Japanese. Then after that, I went back and wrote this book. Yes, I was trying to think when I did it. This was a course text that went along with the course I was teaching in the UK, which was the first 3 years of general practice in primary care medicine. And so it's health, behaviour and society. It's all about population health and public health and general practice, written with my friend and colleague Philip Cotton, who was at the University of Glasgow at the time. I learned a lot reading that book, writing this. It was good. And then, fresh with enthusiasm for writing books, I ended up writing this one when I was on maternity leave because I hadn't finished it in time.
Oh, wow.
And then my colleague Steve Durning, I was asked to write a textbook or collate a book on researching medical education. And I've always liked grand plans. So rather than writing a small book that was quite British focused, I asked my colleague Steve Durning, who's based in the US, if he would come on as a co-editor. And between us, we had a very big network. So we have contributions in this book from 4 or 5 continents, from new researchers, from established researchers. And it's a really useful book. It's used as a textbook for lots of masters in health professions education across the world. And because it was successful, we then did a second edition. We were invited to do a second edition by the publisher. So this was published just last year. Success of the first one, they gave us an extra 100 pages, which is like gold dust in publishing. Wow. Every page is gold dust. So we we reviewed what was good about the first edition, what was less good, what was missing, because you don't necessarily see what's missing until afterwards. So this book has 10 new chapters. This is probably the thing I'm best known for.
Wow. Yeah. So we shouldn't just start a book club. We should start a writers club. Before we wrap up, I'm curious about what holds the future for medical education and research, and what kind of challenges or opportunities can our students and practitioners foresee?
That is an interesting one. Across the globe, there's lots of different discussions, and it's interesting because they do intersect. So one of the discussions is on the cost and value of education research, because generally in most contexts there's some sort of limitation in resources. Resources are never finite. So in a medical degree, just as in other areas of life, you have to think, okay, if I pay for this, then I can't pay for that. So where do we spend the money most effectively? Yeah. So there's a growing conversation in the literature about not just what things cost, but their value educationally. One of the other conversations is on the AI and technology in medical education, and that overlaps because AI and technology in medical education is quite expensive, and there are many discussions about, is it any better than the kind of analog or low-tech equivalents? But what this brings out is all the politics in medical education. People want to have the shiny toys, even if they're actually no better than the cheap toys. So that's a really interesting space for debate, and things will evolve. I mean, more technology and more AI and so on will be brought into medical education, but there's a lot of discussion around it. It's not, people are not just blindly adopting things because they're new. So that's a very interesting space. The other interesting space is, I guess I said it earlier, medical workforce planning. We select students into medical school. Most people pass their medical degree, but we're pretty stringent at the point of selection. And then what do they go and do? Do they go and work as doctors? Do they work as doctors for 40 years? Do they work part-time? Do they work full-time? In an environment like Singapore, do they go to the private sector rather than the public sector? So all that kind of unpicking what our graduates do so that we can provide a health service for the full population. So I work with WHO looking at how we can do health professions education globally in all environments, whether you're remote and rural, whether you're in a low resource setting or a high resource setting, and it's fascinating just to kind of think of the whole complexity of this. So those are some of the questions that are going on in the literature, and I'm afraid I've completely forgotten the second part of your question. You'll have to tell me.
Yeah, so I think it's more on the opportunities, or what are the challenges that our students and probably practitioners also can foresee.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, so for students, things change. So what we teach at medical school, I mean, some things will stay the same. The body will stay the same. Your arm will remain your arm, your liver will remain your liver, but treatments change all the time, and approaches to healthcare delivery change all the time. So although there's always debates about how much knowledge should we stuff into people's heads in the 5 years of a medical degree, because actually you have to keep learning when you start becoming a doctor. You don't stop learning when you graduate from medical school. That's just the baseline. That's just the basic. So we have to develop in our students the attitude that they will always be learners, that they will always keep on learning, because that's the only way they can do best practice. And at the same time, what goes with that is they have to learn to adapt. So because things will change, because systems will change. And so we really want adaptable, agile graduates who are just open to that idea of continuous professional development and continuous learning. And that can be challenging. That can be challenging for people. But that's what's needed.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your insightful views, Professor Cleland. So exciting times lies ahead for our future medical leaders. This was a very exciting and informative podcast, and I'm sure a lot of our students and our LKC community will benefit greatly from. And that's a wrap to episode 2 of Learn with Medical Library podcast. Thank you so much, Professor Cleland, for joining us in episode 2. I'll catch you on the next episode with a new guest on board. Until then, I'm your host, Rebecca David, signing off. Keep learning, keep exploring, and keep growing with the power of library.